Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think we should slowly start. It's a great honor for me and great pleasure also to have the possibility to chair a panel in which two very important personalities in economic science were invited. It's on my left hand is Professor Iain Begg from London School of Economics, one of most prestigious economics workplaces in Europe and in the world. Professor Begg is a renowned professional in the area of European economic issues, so it's great to have him in the panel, particularly in this very, I would say, complicated, challenging period in which we have very, very many new phenomena and new developments. The first speaker actually is Professor Georg Milbradt, who comes now from the Technical University of Dresden, which is currently one of, I think, 12 or how many so-called excellent universities in Germany. So again, very, very renowned position. Professor Milbradt, a part of his profound economics expertise in economics and finance, also for a long period was the prime minister of the Bundesland of Saxony, so he has a lot of experience from practical political life, and I think this combination of political background and economics professionality is also very, very good qualification for hearing, as I'm sure, partly provocative and very interesting insight in current issues. Maybe a last sentence from my side. You are closed all day, most of you in this room, so maybe you are not informed about some new developments in this country. We are also living from today in a completely different world than we had before, because we had a board meeting of the Czech National Bank today, and the bank decided to cut its interest rates to just 5 basis points. That means 0.05%. Yeah, so we have basically zero interest rates, the key rate and also the discount rate, it's overnight rate, and the fortnight rate, deposit rates of the Czech National Bank, which are steering the monetary policies in the country. So this is something very novel, combination of some recession or maybe stagflation in the Czech case, because our inflation is, because of cost side, quite high, and this is maybe late, but anyway, monetary response, which tends to, let's say, move in a direction of some quantitative easing policies. So this is something completely new in post-communist world, and definitely in the tradition of monetary policy making in the Czech Republic, and this is something which makes some new insight also over the European issues, things which the leaders of the Eurozone and European Central Bank must resolve today, and they do it. So it's, I think, all enough for the short beginning, and I would like to ask Professor Milbradt to give his presentation. We expect that there will be something like 20-25 minutes for each of the presenters. Then I would ask both of them for short comments of the other, and then the floor will be open for general discussion. Thank you very much, Professor Milbradt.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this session. I hope I can give you some new information concerning the Eurozone crisis and the conclusion from my presentation. I just will begin. I will begin with the history of the disease. The euro crisis is a crisis because of the euro, because we started a badly designed and managed currency union. A currency union normally has a lot of problems, especially when the parts of the currency union are inhomogeneous. And when they are inhomogeneous, you have problems that can be solved by price and wage flexibility or labor mobility. Both instruments, both ways, are not possible in Europe. So we had a lot of problems, and the euro was not an economic program, it was a political program. In the first, we always said the euro must be the result of a political unification. First, political unification, that means a European state in some way, and then a common currency. And by the Maastricht Treaty it was decided to use this monetary instrument as a political instrument to get a unification of Europe. What happened? I just give you here a slide showing you the interest rates. And so you see the different countries, and the red line is Germany, which always has the lowest interest rates. That is Greece. And what you see here is that before the beginning of the euro, that is starting in 1994-5 with the Conference of Madrid, when it was decided where to start, and the fixing of the internal interest rates in 2008, there was a convergence in interest rates. Before, there was a difference in interest rates because the ratings of the countries were different, especially concerning the devaluation risk. And when you look to Greece or to Italy, they always had to devalue their currency, and therefore a foreign investor wanted a risk premium, and that was seen here. In the Greece case, it was an extreme risk all the way before the euro. Then there was a convergence of interest rates. There was a golden time, I would say, the golden age of the euro between 2000 and 2007, and then the interest rates diverged. There were differences in interest rates, and you see you have the same, nearly the same picture as before. Now there is no, officially, no devaluation risk, but there is a default risk, because if you have your debts in a foreign currency, it's easier to default. In your own currency, normally you can't default. And therefore you see the problem here. Why is this different? Because these countries have adapted to low interest rates. For instance, if Italy has saved all his, or had used all his interest saving to repay their debt, Italy would have no debt at all at the moment. But these countries used the new possibilities of low interest rates to expand either the public budget or private investments. And here, and of course, they induced inflation. Here you see the price increases between Greece in this period 95 to 09, 67% on the one side, and Germany 12% on the other side. And you see by this difference that this has a consequence. If your prices rises more, if your price rises more, or your prices rise more than your competitors, you have a competitive problem, and that occurred. On top of this, a lot of money was used for investment in real estate. Here you have the price index of Ireland. If you started at, let's say, 25 here, up to 125, that high, the prices increased by 5 times during this period, and then from the peak, it decreased by 43%. But it is still well above the level when it all started. That is Spain. You see, Spain is still at the beginning of the crisis, not at the end of the crisis, like maybe Ireland. That is Greece. No, there were some price decreases on the real estate market, but not so much. That is France, and that is Germany. You see, Germany had a stable price level all the time. Now, here, prices in Germany are increasing because now people invest in real estate in Germany. The result was a current account deficit. Those countries who use this credit for increasing their spending, private or public, had more imports than exports. And here you see the differences, the imbalances in relation to GDP. And for 5 years or 6 years, from 2005 to 2010, you see extreme current account deficits in the southern periphery. And on the other side, in the northern part, you have surpluses, the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg is a special case, and Finland, Austria, and a little bit Belgium. That is a real problem of the Eurozone, that the monetary items, the monetary figures converged, but the real economy didn't converge. They developed quite differently. So the differences in the Eurozone are much higher now than they were before. The hope was that by the Euro there will be a convergence in real terms as well. But this didn't happen, just the opposite. And that is the growth rate of the Eurozone. You see here the crisis of 2009 coming from America. And here are the other developments. Ireland is still in the second floor. There is some reduction, but concerning the starting point of 9.5, it's much above. There is Cyprus. There is Spain. You see, Spain has not reached the peak as before. That is Greece, still falling. That is France, average. That is Portugal, first a similar development as in the other southern countries, and then no real growth at all. This is Italy. That is the last country, and that is Germany. And you see that before 2007, the growth rate in Germany was under the growth rate of Italy. So our problems with the euro were at the beginning. Then a lot of public improvements of the labor market were made during the Schröder government, and then the development was a little better, but still we are under the European average. But that is interesting. The number of 11 is above the number of 08. So we have overcome the crisis, whereas other countries have not overcome the crisis. They are still in the crisis. So the diagnosis of this disease is growing real imbalances. That is a real problem of the Eurozone. The main problem is the loss of competitiveness. In the case of Greece, there must be a devaluation in real terms, external or internal, by 37% to get competitive. In the case of Spain, it's between 20 and 30. Portugal is above 30. Italy and other countries are within 10 to 20%. That's not so much. We have huge debts of public and private sectors abroad. It's not that they have indebted so much, but they are indebted abroad. We have a reaction of the market from 2007, which is justified. These countries are not able, especially Greece, to repay their debt. So it's not, as a politician said, a liquidity problem which we have, it's a solvency problem. So what I say is that the reactions of the market are justified. You can ask whether they were justified before 2007, because then they thought there were no risks, but there still were, but they were realized in 2007. So it's not a failure, that is my conclusion, a failure of markets, but a failure of politicians, which we have in the Eurozone. And as I said, the Euro had made this crisis possible. Without the Euro, we hadn't had this sort of crisis. The Euro rescue policy. First of all, who is rescued? States in trouble. Oh, sorry. Sorry. So who is rescued? The state's in trouble. That's the official version. Their citizens? Maybe not. Especially not those people, citizens with low income. What we are saving or rescuing are the rich. The banks? Yes, definitely. The banks are safe because we think that without saving banks, we have a problem in the Eurozone. And is the Eurozone rescued? Yes. We rescue the Eurozone in its form of today, yes, of course. The value of the currency, I think, in the end, not. We have huge imbalances, which I have shown, which are now financed no longer by the private market, but by the funds, EFSF and ESM, the new, and especially the ECB, which I will show you. Until now, this rescue policy is very expensive and was not successful. That is the exposure level. That is the total sum of help that was given by the different ways. You see here what is pledged to date is of 1,500,000,000,000 euros, and in the official funds only less than 400 billion were paid out of these funds, and these funds are controlled by the parliaments. Most of the rescue package was not the funds in Luxembourg, but were made by the ECB by two ways, government bond purchases and the so-called target liabilities. If you add up the new fund ESM, European Stability Mechanism, you have altogether 2.2 trillion, and then half will be in the official range, and the other is still in the range of the ECB. And when the ECB is doing the same policy as before, this figures will increase as well. If you calculate alone the German exposure, that are over 700 billion, which are at stake at the moment. It's an extreme case, I say, yes, but only if part of this money is lost, it's still a lot for Germany. And I give you here the other figures for the other countries. Especially France is in danger. If there would be some loss, especially France has a problem. Germany, Netherlands, and Austria, not so much, but the real problem then will be France, which is not able to bear these losses. The fatal role of the ECB, what the ECB is doing, the ECB is financing through its policy current account deficit, the budget deficit, failing banks, and capital flight. In the last period, especially capital flights, money going out of the south to the north is financed by the ECB. How is this done? It's done, I give you a sort of picture, by printing money in the south. Because each national bank can print money, and they do it in the south. The money is coming to the north for repaying the debt, for financing the imports, and then the money doesn't go back to the south because of the risk in the south. The money is going to the Bundesbank, and then it's destroyed. So the printing press is in the south, the shredder is in the north. So altogether, the money base is not increased, but target liabilities and target claims are there, and this means that the north has, via this target system, claims to the south. How is this made? Printing money by accepting weak or no collateral at all. For instance, in the Greek case, the National Bank of Greece can print money by accepting guarantees of the Greek government. which are really worthless. And so this system is a golden credit card for the South. They can finance as much as they want, and they do it, because there is no settlement mechanism in the system, as, for instance, in the United States. In the United States, you have the district feds and the Federal Reserve System, and once in a year, end of March, the accounts had to be cleared, and therefore this can't occur in the United States. They are much more clever than we are. We have no clearing system, and therefore the imbalances, the current account deficit can increase all the time. Oh, sorry. Here you see the current, the net balance in the euro system. This is Germany, this is Spain, and the other countries in between. Relative to the population, the most claims are in Finland. Finland per capita has the most claims, not Germany. And Ireland and Greece are the most per capita, the most indebted countries in the system. Now they say, the politicians say, well, there is an improvement in the South. Please wait. It will solve automatically by just giving them time. That are the GDP deflators, so the prices relative to the rest of the Eurozone. That is Greece. There's a slow decrease in prices, but only a slow decrease. That is Italy. That is Portugal. That is France. For instance, Greece had to reduce internally the prices by 37%, so it must be here in the cellar. Nothing has happened. So there is no real improvement in the South. That is Spain. Spain had to devalue in real prices by around 20–25%. But there's a country who has succeeded. It's Ireland. They have deflated from here, from the peak to there, by around 15%. Why have they deflated? Because the bubble burst in Ireland before the rescue funds, in 06 or 07. So they had to look for themselves, and they did it. And they have a flexible and competitive economy, so they were able to re-stabilize their economy. You have the same situation in the Baltic state, which at that time were not part of the Eurozone. It's Latvia and Estonia, which devalued by around 20%. So it's possible if there are flexible economies. But this flexibility doesn't exist in the South, and that is a real problem. So I think there is no solution possible within the euro. We have the wrong therapy. We are always talking about debt, public debt, and austerity measures. That is, there's some truth in it. But the real problem is the lack of competitiveness. And you have to reduce the prices. And what we are doing in Greece at the moment is we are cutting public expenditures, we are cutting demand, but because prices do not decline, all this cutting is going into the labor market. So the only market which reacts is the labor market, not by prices, but by quantities. And therefore, I think there is no therapy possible for Greece. And the same applies, to my opinion, to Portugal. Spain, Italy may be. On the other side, Ireland, Latvia, and Estonia have managed it. A realignment, if it is not done in the Eurozone, the only alternative is externally, by devaluation, that going out of the Eurozone, devalue and solve the competitiveness problem. So, and on top of this, we want to bail out banks. Just to give you a figure, all public debt, sovereign debt of this periphery is around 3 trillion in English terms. The debt of the banks are 9 trillion. So altogether, if we save banks as well, that means especially the investors and the owners, it's 12 trillion euros, which cannot be, which is not possible in the Eurozone. Then we say growth. They have to grow the South. But when there is no realignment of prices, the disease is not over. So growth is in this moment no alternative for the South. First, they have to realign their prices, and then, as in other countries too, they can grow. The ECB is not solving the problem at the moment, but prolong the disease. And the problem is, at the moment, how to get out of this impasse. How to solve the problem. Going further, I think, is no alternative. Now to the alternative. What the policy is doing is muddling through. They say, well, we do a little bit and that and a little bit there, and then we hope that we solve the problem. But the real problem of the Eurozone, that is not a transfer of essential powers to a central government. That is still, we are still independent countries with no one above. There is no hierarchy. So all the countries have the same right. And what we need in a currency union is a center who has control of the system. Otherwise, it will not function. We have six-pack banking union and debt communization. I think it's a half-hearted solution. The real problem is who enforces the rule? The politicians. Then there will be no enforcement. Conditionality, I think it's a word, but nothing behind it. We set conditions all the time in the form of Greece, and then we say, well, they cannot fulfill it. If you set conditions, then in the case they are not fulfilled, you have to have consequences. But if you are afraid of the consequences, then the conditionality policy cannot work. Especially concerning the ECB, have missing democratic control. All this is done outside the parliaments. And therefore, I conclude all previous measures are inadequate to solve the problem. There are two, in my opinion, two solutions. One is the United States of Europe. We form a common state, like the United States of America, with a powerful European government elected by the European Parliament. We have then a central economic and fiscal and social center in Brussels. And the nation states, the member states, became just states in a European state, like in other federations. If we bail out, which is not done in the United States or in Switzerland, we need even more centralization. That if we talk about a new Europe or more Europe, then we need a more centralized Europe to solve the crisis. When we want to have a bailout system, then in the United States, then in Switzerland. I think this is possible. Especially it's possible for the whole EU at the moment, maybe for some countries within in Europe, and then the problem is what to do with the other inside and outside. And I think that will have a lot of dangers for the European construction in the future. The alternative is to have some sort of solution like in Switzerland, United Europe based on subsidiarity. That means back to the no bailout system. Every country has to look for themselves, and the bank as well. The banks as well. The ECB is only responsible for monetary policy, not for stabilizing the financial markets. That in reality means regional policy. There must be a massive recapitalization of banks, and I would like to use debt equity swaps. That means that the big investors get shares of the banks, then the capitalization problem of the banks is solved, and it's up to the new investors whether the banks will succeed or not. And we must have in this system a unilateral exit from the Eurozone, those countries which cannot obey the rules of this system, which might be possible, then they have the alternative to get the same status as for the moment the Czech Republic. What is bad concerning this solution? It only means to step back a little bit. So I think to get out of the impasse we have, it is necessary to change the course of policy. And that is the result of my conclusions. I think we have only two alternatives: a very centralized Europe, which I think is not possible, but theoretically can solve the problems, and the other is a more decentralized Europe, but that means that we have to stop the bailout policy and this ECB policy of today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Milbradt. He had a lot of provocative issues, I think. Maybe I will have one question now for him to think about. Recently, there was speaking Otmar Issing, another prominent German economist in Prague, and he offered some third alternative, and it is a future of weak euro with, in Europe, full of inconsistent public finance. So no lax financial policies in many European countries, not necessarily all, not better development in the, let's say, corporate governance or governance, let's say, of the Eurozone as a whole, but continuing existence of euro, which because of internal problems will be much weaker currency, which in the end of the day would not be probably against the interests of European exporters, for example. So could be quite living alternative. Now the floor is here for Professor Begg from London School of Economics.
Thank you. What you're going to see here is a reversal of positions where you had a politician giving the economics, and now you'll have an academic economist giving you some of the politics. And I want to start by reflecting on where we think the problems arise in the euro area, because understanding the problems is inevitably going to be part of the solution. And you'll see here that I've put the question mark in the past tense. So unlike Dr. Milbradt, I wonder whether we're well on the way to solving some of the problems. But it's worth recalling what they were, and this will be, to some extent, an overlap with what's already been presented. Monetary union was incomplete. It was designed in the 1980s, adopted in the 1990s, implemented in what we now call the noughties. And the first decade of the euro was a period during which China was re-entering the world economy. As a result, there's something that monetary policy economists refer to as the Great Moderation. China held down prices, made everything look good. So we were able, for the best part of a decade of the euro, to overlook some of the problems that were in this incomplete monetary union. They comprise the following: the fact that there is no federal budget. And the absence of a federal budget matters because there is no agency through fiscal policy to engage in stabilization of the European economy. There is in the US, there is in Germany, there is even in the UK, possibly, though to a lesser extent, in the Czech Republic. But in addition to this, the national public finances are a means by which you're able to deal with things like failing banks, because it's the national finance ministries which ultimately pay out the money when a bank fails. The governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, has made the observation that banks are global in life and local in death, because the locals have to pick up the pieces when these banks fail. So that's one set of problems. Only national bank resolution mechanisms. There isn't in the EU system any attempt to mutualize debt, or indeed a common treasury as there is in the US. And for those of you with a strong historical knowledge will know that the Treasury bond in the US, Treasury bill, was created in 1790 by Alexander Hamilton. Today, the Treasury bill is the foundation of the low cost of financing the US debt, which is in fact bigger as a percentage of GDP than European debt. But aggravating this is the fact that in an integrated economy, with an integrated financial system, and we're about to see this with Hurricane Sandy in the US, New York insurance claims will be paid partly by people from Texas or Ohio even, who might be voting otherwise for Obama. And those cross-border, cross-regional flows through the private sector can deal with economic downturns. We don't have that degree of financial integration at European level. Then, when you look at what the European Central Bank does, it's done all sorts of strange things over the last 2 years that stretch its mandate to breaking point. But at the outset of the euro, we had a rather uncertain view of what the European Central Bank was able to do. All central bankers will tell you that the lender of last resort function is one which they never publicly admit to. But nobody can deny that over the last 2 years, lending in the last resort is something that central banks have done extensively. What this ultimately means is there's no such thing as a European taxpayer. And in the absence of a European taxpayer, many of the normal elements of an integrated entity, a federal entity of some description, can only be done through the national finance ministries. This creates a disjunction between the European level of monetary policy and the European level of finance and fiscal policy. And as Dr. Milbradt has already explained, there were many sources of economic divergence. I will just return to one of them, which he didn't mention, that's the employment trends. And what I've shown in this chart is the orange line, the heavy orange line here, is Spanish employment creation from the start of the euro onwards. And I've indexed this to 2007. So what you see here is massive job generation in Spain. There was a period where Spain was creating half the jobs being created across the entire European Union. And even today, the Spanish figure hasn't come back down. It's still 10 percentage points above what it was a decade and a bit ago. Whereas Germany was very flat in employment. This reaffirms what has already been said about GDP. German employment wasn't being created until about 2005, 2006. It then had a small blip during the crisis and then took off again after 2009. So we do need to bring a little bit of economic perspective into this, but recognize that these divergences, and particularly the balance of payments divergences, were a fundamental weakness of what was going on, reflecting competitiveness. But I see a paradox, and it's the following. When you look at what's happening with the crisis, particularly from outside, I don't refer in this case to the UK, I refer to the general outsider. The accusation against the politicians is that they've done nothing. They've delayed, they've fought about their individual national interests. They haven't really confronted the problem. But the other side of the paradox is that when you look at what's been going on over the last two and a half years, it's a phenomenal rate of change of European economic governance. Now we can argue, and we probably will, about whether it's going to be effective. But the decisions that have been taken are pretty drastic. And here I just give you a very quick summary of them. There's been a reference to what's called the bazooka, having big funds to aim at the markets, to stop them doing adverse things. It started in 2010, particularly with the European Financial Stability Facility. Bazookas have been used in putting together bailouts for 3 countries, as you know, one twice in Greece. The Greeks have defaulted on some of their debt through what's called the PSI, or Private Sector Initiative. We've seen 2 partial rescues, one for Spain, which hasn't really been called on yet, and one for Cyprus, which their still communist president is resisting because he thinks he will get a better deal from the Russians. And now we have the creation of the European Stability Mechanism. This is a permanent crisis resolution fund. So at that side, massive innovation taking place in European governance. On the fiscal discipline side, on the right of this chart, you can see all the things that have been discussed. Reform of the Stability and Growth Pact, the creation of something called the excessive imbalances procedure, the obligation on all member states to emulate the Germans by having a variation on the Schuldenbremse, the debt brake, requirements to coordinate policy, so the 6-pack and the 2-pack, to use Brussels jargon. These are things which are fundamental changes in economic governance, brought together in something called the Fiscal Compact, which is as the Czechs and the Brits know, something that all 25 other member states have signed. Then you have a whole range of structural policies as well as all the reforms of financial regulation. And on the governance side, at the bottom of this chart, we've invented something called the European semester, which means that national budgets first have to go to Brussels to be scrutinized. This is a form of centralization, and then come back to in the second semester of the year for agreement by the national authorities. We've had council after council at European level, at least half a dozen chances to save the euro. We've seen moves over the last few weeks to flesh out whatever banking union, fiscal union, and political union mean. And then beneath the surface, and here I disagree with Dr. Milbradt, I think quite a lot is going on in countries like Greece, Italy, and Spain to try to reform the supply side of the economy. It's just that supply side reform, as you mentioned with the Schröder government, takes time. The Schröder government took 6 or 7 years to do it. Greece has been asked to do it overnight. They will never succeed in this overnight. Now, Greece has a much more fundamental problem than Germany ever did. That's undeniable. But that progress is occurring. So how do I resolve these sorts of paradoxes? Well, the first observation I'll make, and you understand this is strange for an economist to talk about politics, is I think that there is a very distinct notion of political time. On occasion, politicians can do things quickly. Think of some of the landmark weekends in 2008 when the Eurogroup got together to save the European banking system, or 2010 when the first Greek rescue was finally sorted out, and the EFSF was created. That can be done very occasionally, but many of the other changes are constitutional. And being constitutional, they have to go through a process. Contrast that with markets. What do markets want? Markets expect the solution by yesterday. Devise a problem and say, unless there's a solution by yesterday, or perhaps today, if we're being very generous, we will attack you. But what's the process that governments have to follow? First, if you're in a country which is being asked to make major supply-side changes, you have to explain to your populace why you need to do it. Often, that populace will be rioting on the streets of Constitution Square or the Plaza Mayor in Madrid or Plaza Thol. And when they do that, there's a real difficulty for the governments to say, you have to change, especially when the populace says, it's not our fault, it's the bankers, it's the politicians, it's somebody else, the property speculators. But equally, in a country like Germany, a leader like Angela Merkel has to look both ways. She has to reflect what's going on in German domestic politics. She has to confront the tabloid newspaper Bild Zeitung. She has to be aware of what the Bundesverfassungsgericht, the Constitutional Court, is saying, at the same time as trying to play a European game. And persuading Germans that there is a European game as well as a national game is not something that can be done that easily or quickly. And those sorts of games, I think, operate at multiple levels, within member states, between member states, and between particular institutions at European level, particularly the central bank against others. Nevertheless, and I can say this as somebody who's from the wrong side of the English Channel, if not from the wrong side of the Atlantic, I think many commentators in the rest of the world fail to appreciate the magnitude of the political commitment to the euro and the fact that the euro is not the same as a fixed exchange rate system. A single currency is qualitatively different from a fixed exchange rate system. So when American economists come onto the media screens and say, it's easy, all Spain has to do is leave the euro, all Greece has to do is devalue, they fail to understand that a single currency is distinct from an exchange rate system. So, remember George Bush the First? You remember his famous slogan? Read my lips, he said. And he was proved to be wrong because he was saying, read my lips, there'll be no new taxes. But I think it's also time we started reading the lips of European politicians and other leaders. And for the benefit of the interpreters, I'll read this one out. It says, we'll do whatever is necessary to safeguard the euro. And according to my speech bubble, this is Angela Merkel talking to Mario Draghi. They are doing it. They're making commitments. occasionally we have to read their lips. Now, some of you, when you were children, may have played the American game of chicken. This is where two people run towards each other and try to be the last one to move out the way. If you're the last to move out the way, you win. You make the case that you're not the one who's going to blink first. We see many such games going on at European level at the moment. I already mentioned the European Central Bank against the member states. The European Central Bank says, well, we'll do this, we'll inject some liquidity, or we'll make some other initiative, and then it's up to the member states to make the next move. But the member states say, well, no, we can't move until the European Central Bank does it. This is an explanation for delay. You see conflicts, since this is part of our topic this afternoon, between what the euro area as a whole wants and what certain of the non-members want. But even within the non-members, there are games. The Brits and the Czechs have a distinctive position from the Poles or the Latvians. The Swedes are somewhere in the middle. So we see distinctive positions in these games. Markets are attacking governments and vice versa. Some leaders, you could say that Merkel is in opposition to Mario Monti and Mariano Rajoy. These games are going on all the time. And then the citizens come into this. They're in the middle. We're told it's the bankers' fault, so it's people against bankers. But citizens also want to be consulted. And here I fully share what Dr. Milbradt is saying, that this is a fundamental part of the resolution of this, is to engage and bring citizens with you, explain to them that what you're doing is in their interest. But ultimately, what's all this about? I argue what this is all about is who, in the end, is going to pay. Where does the burden end up? Because burdens are going to have to be shared somehow in this system, and we need clarity on where the burden sharing occurs. Now, there's a new expression has emerged. It came out in the European Council a couple of weeks ago. Instead of having economic and monetary union, we're now going to have genuine economic and monetary union. So we have to go from EMU to GEMU. And this is leading us to think about what it really means. Among there are four axes in the document, four things that were discussed in what's called the Four Presidents' Report and in what was more or less agreed by the European Council. A common framework for finance, or put it in plainer English, banking union. Now, we're yet to establish what banking union will mean in practice, and in particular there's a dispute about whether there should be common deposit insurance, which is a form of mutualization of debt, or only a limited supervision of the most systemically important banks. But that's the first axis. Then there's supposed to be an integrated budgetary framework, which you might say is code for fiscal union. I'll come back to that in a moment. There's supposed to be common coordination of economic policy making, which means the supply side, and for those that have forgotten it existed, something called Europe 2020, a strategy that was top of the bill as recently as 2 years ago. And finally, the democratic legitimation and accountability, which might be a way of saying political union. It's being pushed more by the Germans than by the French. That, I think, raises tougher challenges when you talk about the euro area and the non-euro area, because you can democratically legitimate what you're doing inside the euro area and fall foul of what the outsiders want, particularly the difficult outsiders from a country that I'm fairly familiar with. All of this is open to varied interpretations. So I take the example of fiscal union. What do we mean by fiscal union? A narrow, dare I say it, German interpretation is a union of rules. Abide by common rules and you will have a good fiscal union. A wider conception is one which maybe the French president wants, which is common financing, what you might call liquidity or financing union. And a more extreme version is cross-border transfers. Now, in Germany, there is a system of equalization between Länder, known as Finanzausgleich, which transfers money from richer Länder, like Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria, or Hessen, to the poorer ones like Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. It's not liked in Germany, and there's very little chance that Germans will extend that concept to Greece. In fact, no chance of that happening. So I think a transfer union is a step too far in the current development of European solidarity and politics. So I would say fiscal union under discussion is somewhere between rules and financing. But then you have to think about what's involved in debt mutualization. Now, the first comment I'd make on debt mutualization is that those who talk about Eurobonds as a way of dealing with the crisis are looking at it in the long way. Debt mutualization is a long-term strategy. It's not something that's going to bring Greece out of crisis or Spain out of crisis. But it should be on the table for a redesign of EMU. It's difficult, and there are differing views in this. So Paul Taylor, the correspondent of Reuters, writing in the in the International Herald Tribune, had a somewhat tongue-in-cheek article earlier this week where he referred to no-mu, which is no mutualization, standard German position, old mu, which is an idea coming from the German Council of Economic Advisors, which is write off old debt but not new debt, and new mu, which is a French and Italian version, which is mutualized new debt. So these things all come together, and I think that conditionality is central to it, because the strongest opposition to mutualization of debt is that it promotes moral hazard. Conditionality is the way in which you counter moral hazard. Designing the conditions for a Eurobond would enable the European Union collectively, and certainly the euro area, to have a degree of mutualization which drives down collective financing costs. It would make it like the Treasury bond in the US, and also be attractive to other countries like China, which are looking for an alternative. So this is not a heading you see very often. Is there any reason to be optimistic? Well, I think that, yes, there is a new governance framework. It should result in better discipline. It depends on implementation, and that's always the unknown in this. There are new financing mechanisms. There's also a sense in which all governments are beginning to realize they're in it together. That is a fundamental way of getting political support for it. There may, in addition, be further efforts to complete the gaps. Banking union, political union, fiscal union, these things can all come about. And I do detect initial signs of economic rebalancing. Now, price levels, I agree, haven't adjusted correctly yet, but unit labor costs are adjusting, and quite massively. If you look at the figures for Greece, what you see is that between 2009 and the projections for 2013, Greece will have reduced its unit labor costs relative to Germany by something of the order of 20 to 25%. Now that is a massive internal devaluation. It's what Latvia did previously. The Greeks, it's something new for them. It's not yet happening on a sufficient scale for Spain, but the dynamic is in the right direction. So that is occurring. But it's not just because of Hurricane Sandy that we can anticipate storms. This is going to be a bit more difficult for you to read, but the Spanish banks, have they told us all the truth yet? Is all the dirt out of the system? We had the audit a few weeks ago saying they had liabilities or risks of 60 billion euros, so that the 100 billion euros they've been promised ought to be enough. Maybe that's not the case. We can see that markets are not interested in the debt of Southern Europe. They would rather put their money in German bunds, getting no interest to speak of, than put it in higher risk securities in the south. Now that does lead to potential further strikes, debt strikes, where they don't pay. We can see a potential storm cloud politically. Either countries renege on what they've promised, or you find the awkward members of the European Union, not the Czechs, of course, the Brits, saying, we don't want to go along with what you were proposing, and slowing down the whole system. Karlsruhe can be a storm cloud. It's the seat of the German Constitutional Court. And I understand that if you read the judgment from September very carefully, buried away in somewhere like page 72, there is a statement saying, well, we haven't quite made up our minds on certain aspects of what's going on, and we will come back to this when we give you the final decision. And finally, a storm cloud could simply be accidents. Politicians can make mistakes. Think of the rather bizarre decision last November by Yorgo Papandreou to say, I'm having a referendum, which was, of course, unwinnable. He was rapidly told by Angela Merkel and others, no, you're not having a referendum. Forget that silly idea. So let me finish off with a number of propositions. you see that I've labeled them as potentially rash. The first is that, and I think we're agreed on the panel on this, time has been bought. It's mainly the ECB's doing, and it may be that the ECB has reached just about the limit of how far it can stretch its elastic in its mandate with what's called OMT, the outright monetary transactions. The form of not quite quantitative easing that was announced by Mario Draghi in September. If it's fully sterilized, it's not quantitative easing. If it isn't fully sterilized, which I think it won't be, then it is to some extent quantitative easing. There is a new framework, and I sense that both that Europe's leaders get it, they get what they have to do, which they had not done previously, and also this is reinforced by what I referred to in the rebalancing. There are big risks. I think that the divisions growing up in the European Union between 17 and 27 or 17, 25, 27, whatever variable geometry you want to refer to, that is going to be damaging to the fabric of the European Union. And I would be not surprised if I cease to be a citizen of the European Union in the next 5 or 6 years. The way things are going in London, that's not improbable. And that can undermine decisions in other areas. And we have in about 3 weeks' time, there'll be the European Council trying to sort out the future EU budget. That looks as though it's in trouble. We should also recognize that the crisis is not over. Even if you agree with my optimistic slant that there is a promised land in the future, we're not there, and we need to think how we get from today to this new promised land, which might include Eurobonds. And the difficulty with this is how to deal with it. But nevertheless, and I'll say this cautiously, maybe, just maybe, we can start in a time for optimism. Now, I found a cartoon which I think you'll find amusing. Is this just about visible in the big room? I'll read it out. This is as you can see, a Greek and a German flag, and you can guess who's about to come into the room. See the bucket of water poised over the door, and Angela Merkel saying, "Oh, please come in, Mr. Prime Minister." This, I think, reminds us of the wise words of an 18th century sage called Samuel Johnson, who said once, "Those who do not feel pain seldom think that it is felt." Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Begg, and particularly I would like to thank both speakers also for time management, very good time management, time discipline. That's important. Maybe if we had this fiscal discipline, some similar kind in Europe in previous years, we would not be in such bad problems. On the other hand, it was mentioned that fiscal discipline is a problem in Europe. Yes, it is, but if you looked fiscal developments of Spain, fiscal developments on Italy, even Portugal, these are countries which for a long period had surpluses, or they had at least primary balance in surplus. And so it was not, after all, so bad in Europe with fiscal discipline. To a much higher degree, it's a problem of loss of competitiveness, which was mentioned. Maybe some short comments. Presentation of Professor Begg. I don't have much to say because I'm basically on his side. I know most things, but if you looked, I rather want to comment one point that he's just from the United Kingdom. You know, United Kingdom is certainly a country with its own very flexible currency, but unfortunately it shares some of the problems which were mentioned about the Eurozone or some European countries. In recent years, there was quite important property bubble, price bubble in the United Kingdom. If you looked at the level of indebtedness of not only British government, but particularly British households and the private debt in Britain, it's very highly accumulated private debt for years. There was some loss of competitiveness of British industry and other British sectors. It was very much discussed a few years ago, like Britain was losing industry and industrial competitiveness in the part, if it's a mistake or not, and so forth. There is quantitative easing, I would say, quite radical. The Bank of England was pioneering in some efforts to stabilize via this non-standard monetary policy the British economy. which was up to recent quarter in a recession for quite long period, again in recession. And in spite of all of that, there's basically no devaluation of British pound. British pound didn't react in a way which one can expect from, let's say, textbook knowledge. Yeah, that country in problems should have as an output, as an outcome, weak currency, and this will help the competitiveness of the country. Nothing like that happened. Investors, not much. It did, you say, it did, yes, but not much. And my explanation is very simple. We have the Bank of England, which has all powers of the lender of last resort. And this is what the investors are looking at, and this is why they are trustful as regards British debt and investing in the British economy, which was not up to recent period case of the Eurozone. And even now, certainly after all these recent decisions, the European Central Bank is not full-fledged lender of the last resort with the same mandate like have typically other central banks worldwide. Yeah? So this is, in my eyes, the key problem. And as regards trust of the financial markets, certainly doesn't cure everything, definitely not, but trust of financial markets is important. As Professor Begg said, financial markets wanted to see the solution the day before. And one of the reasons why they were so nervous is this knowledge that there are the limitations in operational let's say, possibilities of the European Central Bank, which are not typical for the United States Fed, for Bank of England, for Japanese Central Bank, and so forth, Switzerland, for example. Yeah. So now I will like to ask both speakers, maybe first Professor Milbradt, then Professor Begg, very shortly to comment on the other one, to the counterpart, if they wish, definitely not longer than 3 minutes, please, and then we should discuss all together. So would you like to?
I would begin with the argument that things are improving. I'm not of, I don't think they are. Mr. Begg has said the labor costs, unit labor costs are decreasing. Yes, they are, but that said nothing because it's an artificial number. In the depression, the enterprises that are weak go bankrupt, and by this, labor costs are increasing. Nothing has changed. I've had this experience after the unification. When you are talking about real labor costs, you have to talk about the unemployment. Only with there is no increase in unemployment, that is a measurement for competitiveness. So the real measure is prices of competitive. Is someone from another country buying your goods? And if you look to Greece, nothing has improved. Prices are not going down, and therefore there is no reversal, a fundamental reversal of the methods of payment, and that is a problem, and that is a difference to Ireland or to the Baltic states. The markets do not function in Greece and in some other countries, and so long as the labor markets and the goods and services market are not functioning, austerity policy cannot solve the problem. And growth policy neither. That is the problem you have to solve. Second, if you are so sure that the markets are irrational, you can put your private money into Spanish banks. Spanish banks, which have a balance sheet with a lot of bad investments. So long as these banks do not write off their losses, there is no confidence, and the markets are right. There is not a lack of confidence because they are irrational, but because they are rational. And that is the same with reforms. If reforms are made
which convince the investors, then they will react. But the reforms we are talking about are lip services, mostly. Lip services. And I was a politician for nearly 20 years. What we are looking at is politicians say, we do, just to say that they are doing something. But look at the results. The six-pack or fiscal compact is nothing else than it was before. So long as you have not a centralized government, there is no possibility to control the system. You cannot govern United Europe or a Eurozone by a conference of prime ministers. You have to have a hierarchy if you have some mutualization of debt. When you look at real federations like Switzerland and the United States, you have no mutualization of debt. And look at the American history. Debt were mutualized after the War of Independence because most of the debt was due to the War of Independence under Hamilton. And then the states in America thought that they will bail it out. And they had a lot of debt. And there was nearly a civil war in America to solve this problem, and then it was clear that there was no bailout. And look at California. Nobody in America, in Washington, would think about that the Federal Reserve should buy Californian bonds just to decrease the interest rate of California, or we bail out it. And if you have a united Europe with no central power which has the right to govern regionally and locally, then you have a no bailout system like in Switzerland. With the bailout system, Switzerland wouldn't exist.
Okay, thank you very much.
Therefore, you have to look carefully what you want. If you want a mutualization of debt, a mutualization of a banking union, which means the old debts shall be paid by someone, then it is only tolerable when you have a system which is constructed in a way that this will not happen again. But so long as you haven't, it's just the bad way to pay and then talk about some changement. This changement never will occur.
Thank you very much. I already wanted to stop you, but it's clear, your position. Please, Professor Begg.
Well, a first comment on the original presentation is that the statement that markets cannot be blamed, I think, is exaggerated. Markets, as you saw in the chart of spreads, had driven down spreads for Greek bonds to virtually zero by 2003. That was an unrealistic measure because it wasn't building in credit risk. And I think that markets, especially in the frenetic period of 2008, 2009 onwards, are at least partly to blame for some of the difficulties we've seen. Now, there's an easy statement for politicians to make saying markets are always right, you can't buck the market. Mrs. Thatcher used to say it every day. But I think that markets go through long fashions which cause difficulties, and that is part of the difficulty we're trying to confront here. Now, on whether we can emulate the US model. The US model, let's not forget, has a central government which has roughly 20 to 25% of GDP as its budget. The European level has 0, 1%, is negligible. You cannot engage in stabilization of the euro area as a whole, or the European Union as a whole, with a budget of 1%. So the reason for saying that mutualization of debt makes sense at European level is that we have this in-between system. It's not a United States of Europe. In fact, I remember one Italian professor put it to me as, we don't have a United States of Europe, we have a united Europe of states. And the power is with the states. They are going to be the ones which will engage in any kind of counter-cyclical budgetary policy. So it makes sense for them to be able to mutualize debt in that narrow context. Therefore, the parallel with not bailing out California, I think, doesn't work.
Okay, also clear, Stan. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, its turn is on you. Please, I would prefer to take, I think, 3-4 questions or short comments and then give floor to the speakers and repeat it all.
Thank you. Mats Brown from the Institute of International Relations here in Prague. Thank you both for very interesting lectures. My first question goes to Professor Begg, and it's relating to the 4 components of a so-called genuine economic and monetary union. I would like to hear your view if all of the 4 parts are actually necessary. Because as I see it, if we have 4 parts, a banking union, the fiscal union, and integrated economic, and the 4th part, and the political union, seems to be the most difficult one. And also the one where you find the least concrete proposals so far. If you look at the report from Van Rompuy, you do not find really very much concrete what should be included in this so-called political union. If you will go to look at the Future of Europe group, the report from the 11 foreign ministers, you also find very little substantive proposals for the political unions. And as far as you find such proposals, it actually seems that these proposals could cause more problems in the EU 27 than they actually might solve. I'm thinking now about the mentioning of European Parliament voting with only MEPs from Eurozone countries regarding some issues, etc., etc. So my question to you is really, do you think this is a necessary part of a genuine EMU, and if you would think it solves problems or actually causes problems? And if I may, just a very short question for Professor Milbradt. It's about, as I say, and if I understood correctly, your preferred option, the second conclusion, second possible solution as you proposed. What do you see as the potential risks of that model or costs? As I assume it involved a Greek failure, Greek exit from the Eurozone. What cost would you estimate for Germany and for the other parts of the Eurozone of that solution? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very clear questions. Then I noticed here.
Vladimir Handel, Institute of International Relations. I have a question rather to Professor Milbradt. Could you give us, you are a member of the CDU party, and would be interesting to hear from you your interpretation of the discussion within the CDU party on the way of solution to a solution of the Eurozone crisis. You prefer, or you say, the federalization is one of the ways of solution. Do you see in the CDU now this balance between the union method and communitarization method, which was started by Mrs. Merkel 2010? Do you see this debate heading towards more federalization, or is it still this rather awkward balance between intergovernmental cooperation and deepening of the European Union zone? And connected question, we have parliamentary elections in Germany next year. Do you expect these specific issues of the solution of the European Eurozone crisis be a major issue of the election campaign? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have already 4, I think, rather complicated questions, so maybe I remember you, and before I will ask the speakers to answer.
Right. The question about whether all 4 parts of the genuine economic union are necessary isn't as easy as saying yes or no, because it depends on how they're projected. I think elements of all 4 parts are. Now, banking union is probably the most clear-cut. It's very difficult to envisage a successful single currency without having a considerable degree of banking union being put in place. Now, the three elements of banking union that are on the agenda are, first, common supervision. That seems to be agreed as a principle, but with a dispute about whether that should be for all 6,000 banks in the European Union or just the 20 or so biggest ones. I suspect that part of Germany's reticence on the latter is They don't want the rest of the world knowing just in what a bad state their Landesbanken are, which is a great difficulty in this. Common resolution mechanisms really means taxpayers, because when banks have to be resolved, ultimately somebody presents a bill to the taxpayer which the taxpayer has to pay. Should that be the national taxpayers, or should it be the non-existent European taxpayer? That's going to be difficult, but it has to be settled somehow, or either there has to be a key for distributing the burden or some other means of sharing it. The most difficult is the common deposit insurance, because that is de facto a Eurobond. And a Eurobond raises all kinds of complementary issues. Now, fiscal union, I think I explained in my initial presentation the different options there. I think transfer union is out of the question. It's something that's just too far to be considered as a permanent measure. But a solidarity transfer, a temporary transfer, is something that could be considered. The coordination of economic policies is already there, because it's Article 126 of the treaty, which says we shall coordinate in the common interest. It's just a deepening of that coordination. And that leaves the democratic legitimation. Now, democratic legitimation, as more and more power accrues to non-elected technocrats, whether it's Van Rompuy or the European Commission, that's going to cause unease amongst citizens. So something more than the president of the European Central Bank turning up once every 3 months to speak, and he always speaks down to the members of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee of the Parliament, that's not enough. But we don't yet have the answers to that. And I think there's a great search going on, especially in Berlin, for a way of making that operational, but something more extensive is going to be needed in that respect. I'll say something very quickly on Greek exit. It's put most of the time as Greece in or Greece out. But I think there's a third solution to this, which is Greece defaults. What's weighing on Greece is the fact that as its economy spirals downwards, the debt, even if it stays stable as a level, becomes an ever higher proportion of GDP. Now, if Greek debt, and I know it was politically inconceivable, but if Greek debt had been written off early in 2010, we'd have a much less dramatic problem than we have now. So at some stage, I think the politicians in Europe are going to have to countenance a major write-off of Greek debt. Now, Greece is not going to devalue its way out of trouble. It lacks an export sector. It's not going to get an export sector by devaluation, because devaluation opens Pandora's box. Instant inflation, demise of the Greek banks, major problems of dealing with the debt. I think Greece needs supply-side policies, not price policies.
The losses have occurred, and some of us have to pay for the losses. And that is what we are talking about. The losses which have occurred. And I'm talking also about the losses which will incur in the future if we don't change the system. Now, the losses of the past. Who can pay? Let's say the case of Greece, because it's an extreme case. The taxpayer in Greece? No. Only part of it, because you can only tax the labor and real estate. The rest of potential taxpayers are abroad. And those in the country feel treated unfairly when they have to bear all the costs of the party. And those with a big wallet are out of the country. The second is the investors. Who gave Greece credit? I'm in favor of this. And I agree the best would have been if Greece defaulted in 2010. But what does that mean? And why didn't that happen? Because then all the banks who were heavily invested in Greece had problems. And the real, the biggest creditor of Greece were French banks. And because of the French banks, Mrs. Lagarde wanted to have a rescue package, not for Greece, for the French banks. And from this time onwards, a lot of private investments were put into the ECB or into the Luxembourg funds. That means that the private investor no longer bears the risk, but the taxpayer who is behind the ECB and the Luxembourg funds. And that is what's going on. And we are now when we are now talking about a haircut or default, then it is mainly the taxpayer, which was not involved 2 years before, 2.5 years before, who has to pay. And that is the third potential payer. It is a taxpayer in the core countries. And I think they will have to pay. And because our government, that is my opinion, has made a lot of mistakes during the last 2.5 years, we have to pay, and the bill is round about 80 billion euros. In all cases, we have to bear, from the case of Greece, 80 billion. Up to now, when we wait more, it will became more costly. And then there's a fourth payer, potential payer, that is all the debt will be repaid by inflation. And I think that will be going on in the future. And at the moment, so long as we have an interest rate in the Eurozone, which is just under the inflation rate, there is some devaluation of the debt. But the difference of 2% or so is not enough. We need an inflation in the core countries of 10% or so to solve the situation under the condition that there is no price increase in the south. If there is another price increase in the south, the inflation rate in the core countries must be higher. And I think this an inflation rate of 10% or more will destroy the currency union in Germany. If this measure will be applied, then the Germans say that was not what we agreed 20 years ago. We agreed on a monetary union, on an ECB, which behaved like the old Bundesbank. That was the only way to persuade the German public to join the monetary union. And that is the problem of Mrs. Merkel. She do not dare to say the truth at the moment, that some of the money is lost. Therefore, Greece cannot default at the moment. Because in the same moment, the federal government has to honor the guarantees which it had given the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau. And at the same time, all the balanced budget policy of Germany is over. If you have to pay this amount, then a balanced budget in Germany or a Schuldenbremse is unrealistic. And therefore, all these problems are postponed. And I know all the actors in Berlin personally. And they say, well, after 2014, let's wait, maybe there will be a wonder or maybe a solution, but there will be no wonder. And they will say, well, we have to accept the facts, but not before the election. And concerning the main figures in Germany, I would say Merkel is driven by the mistakes of their predecessors, and she sees no political way out at the moment. So she is going on and on and on and says conditionality, 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 but nobody believes it. And I don't believe in conditionality. So long as you are afraid of a crash, then the conditionality is no alternative. And you see it in the case of Greece. And the other is Schäuble. Schäuble is of the old pan-European generation of West Germany, and he thinks he gets his beloved United States of Europe by the crisis, and he is very interested in the crisis. He wants this solution I said to you, and that is not an economic union. That's not enough, not a banking union. It's a political union with a political central power, not a conference of states. It is the Europeization of the states, what he has in mind. I think it can function, but I don't see public support of it. So I say what we can have is a political union, the Swiss type. And that means that you cannot have a mutualization of debt. But nevertheless, you have to have a centralization of economic and fiscal decisions. And you are right, a budget of 1% or 2% of GDP in the Eurozone in Brussels is not enough. We need 20% or 15% or so, and that means a transfer of sovereignty. And that we are talking about, not about some little things, but because of a rebuilding of Europe. And the last thing I want to say, a transfer union. I think a transfer union is necessary in Europe. And we have it in a nucleus, that's our regional funds, very small. What we are now doing is a dysfunctional transfer union where payments are not going from the rich to the poor, but from those who obey the laws to those who don't obey the laws. If you look at a real solidarity system in Europe, most of the money had to be paid in the East. The East is the eastern countries, or the eastern regions are the poor regions, not the southern countries. Spain is not poor, Italy is not poor, Greece is not poor compared to Slovakia, to Estonia. And Ireland has up to now a GDP which is above the German GDP. So we are not talking about solidarity in a way like in a private society, or in a society paying from those who have a lot of money to those who have not enough money in a systematic way. But what we are doing is to give a golden credit card. That is a transfer system we have at the moment, and I think that is has to be changed to a real transfer system, and I'm in favor of this. Maybe it's too much, but when it's all too much, then we have to say that as in the economic history, all currency union have failed. And when we are not able to make this jump forwards, then all this what we are doing and talking about will be unsuccessful, and then we will have the same experience of all currency unions before, that it will fail.
Okay, and what about the German elections? It was a second question.
I said to you, the German elections will be that all parties will say there are only credits, no losses. And we look for your taxpayer, for your savers, that nothing is lost. And because all parties, the main parties, are saying this, there is no alternative. There will be no euro discussions, besides the fact that if you ask the public, more than 60% are against the rescue policy. And okay. It's a little bit curious, but I think the truth will come out in 2014, and then in Germany the real issues will be discussed and the real decisions will be taken, not before.
Okay, so we have 2 years ahead. It's good baby, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe one short comment from myself as regards the solution consisting in, I would say, true default of Greece in 2010. Definitely from, let's say, market perspective, it would be the best. But in any case, it would mean that immediately there would be necessary some recapitalization or bailout of banks not only France, but also Germany, Austria, some other countries.
And equity swaps.
And maybe yes,
equity
but
swaps.
in the case of debt equity swaps, probably it will be finally anyway government money which will have to be paid into, because big part of it were Greek government debts, and there were also involved a lot of West European public money already at the time. So the owner coming out of the debt equity swaps will be to a high degree public sector of the Western European countries anyway. So in my eyes, it's in the end of this the same as what really happened, that the final payer is not, let's say, or core European taxpayer. And the real question is, which way was more expensive for the taxpayer? Whether to do it immediately and radically, or this salami method, step by steps, which we see. Anyway, there was another question in this part of the room, please.
Thank you, Thomas Weiss, Charles University in Prague. I would like to ask a kind of contextual question. You have been talking a lot about the developments within the EU 17 or the EU 27. I have two short questions. The first of them would be, what is the role of external actors, of the global actors, in the solving of the euro crisis? And the other side of the same coin, which would be the second question, how do you, or which consequences do you perceive for the EU at the global level because of the euro crisis? Thank you.
Thank you. Please hear another one.
Hello, I'm Vid Beneš from the Institute of International Relations. I have two very short comments. Thank you very much for the interesting discussion or dispute between Professor Milbradt and Professor Begg. What I conclude from your discussion is that, in fact, there is an alternative between two options. You either have a common European budget, I mean sizable European budget, or you mutualize the debts. I was listening to Professor Begg, and my impression is that you would agree with the idea that you either have the American system with federal budget and you allow the states to default and you have no mutualization of debt, but because you are quite skeptical about the possibility of having a European budget and transfer union, then you see the mutualization of debt as the only solution. My second comment goes to Professor Milbradt. Competitiveness, it's a buzzword, but I'm a political scientist, I'm not an economist, but my impression is that if you are in a closed system, and a closed system is a system when most of the transactions and most of the trade goes between or within the system, and this is the European internal market, then competition is a zero-sum game. You gain competitiveness and someone else loses the competitiveness. So my argument is that as long as you are in this relatively closed system when most of the international trade goes between EU 27, then you cannot raise the competitiveness of all members. And you have to, if you want to raise competitiveness of all of them, you have to undo the biggest success of the internal market, the fact that most of the trade is done between EU 27. So I'm quite skeptical towards the idea that in the internal market, you can raise competitiveness of all members. Competitiveness in closed system is a zero-sum game.
Yeah, another question?
So, I'm sorry, last comment. You cannot have 27 Germanys in European Union or 17 Germanys in.
Just short remark. Germany doesn't consist of 16 or how many Bavarias. Yeah, but you don't have anything like that in any other country. But the problem is that you have to support some of those which are losing, and typically, in spite of all regional policies, the gravity principle works. So those which are poor typically are in the future period more poor relatively than now, and the rich are more rich. In Germany, in the Czech Republic, and elsewhere. No else question? So please.
On the competitiveness. First of all, competitiveness is not in a closed system, it's in an open system. The EU and the Eurozone is in competition with the rest of the world, especially China. And what we are looking at the moment is that some European countries, especially in the north, are competitive on the world markets, and they don't lose their share in the world market, like Germany, and there are some others which are losing them. So altogether, Europe is losing, and I think if we want to have some chance in the future, it's not only necessary to unite Europe so that we say we have 500 million inhabitants. 500 million inhabitants doesn't mean anything if they are not competitive compared with especially the emerging economies in Southeast Asia or in Brazil or whatever in the world. So that is what we have to do. And now looking at Greece, Greece has not lost against Germany. That is not the problem of Greece. Greece has lost against Bulgaria. Bulgaria has the same weak economy. But most of the industry, for instance, textile industry, was moving from Greece to Bulgaria. Why? Because in Bulgaria, the wages were 1/2 or 1/3 of the wages in Greece. So long as the wages in Greece are so high, so long as the minimum wage in Greece is above the European or the Euro level, and the Greece government does not accept the Troika conditions to cut minimum wage to the level of Spain. They say in Greece, this is not tolerable for us. So long there will be no competitiveness. For instance, Greece is a net importer concerning food. Tomatoes are imported from Holland and not grown in their own country. And the other benchmark for me for Greece is Turkey. Look at Turkey. It's going well. But prices in Turkey are around about 50% of Greece prices, and therefore the tourism is going to not to Greece, to Turkey. The prices are lower and the services are better. So long as that is not solved, there is no solution for Greece. And therefore I say the real question is Greece going to be competitive? Not to have an industrial sector like the US or like Germany. They have to cut their imports. Import substitution is the name of the game, not increasing exports. That I think is very difficult concerning, well, tourism, it might be possible. Reducing imports by cutting prices, becoming more competitive, to be in the same situation as Bulgaria. Why is Bulgaria better than Greece? Bulgaria had not so much when they began after the fall of communism. The second I would say is the European budget. I think the European budget is in the end necessary for a currency union. If you don't want to have a common budget, then there is no substitution. There's no substitution. To think to do it on the national level with some sort of coordination without a hierarchical system, I think it cannot function, it will not function. And therefore, if we don't want to transfer real sovereignty to Brussels, then it's not possible to talk about a currency union of 17, maybe a currency union of 5 to 6 or 7 can be functioned without it, because the countries are homogeneous, so you need no sort of coordination. And the last, I would say, is always talking about the nervousness of capital markets, the nervousness of investors. I think it's the fundamental rule of capitalism, that if you own your own money and investment, you take the risk. You have to be nervous. That is a difference to socialism. If there is someone who saves you, the taxpayer, then I'm becoming nervous as a taxpayer. And an economist, I think this capitalism with the state insurance cannot work. So we have to go back to the real fundament of capitalism, and that is spelled that you are liable, that you take risk, that you are responsible, and that, therefore, because you are responsible and liable, you are given autonomy. But when liability and responsibility is transferred to the state, then there cannot be autonomy. Then you're like in a casino, in a very special casino. You are playing, and when you're gaining money, you get it. And when you're losing, you get it back again. That is not capitalism. Capitalism is losses and chances, but not chances without losses.
Okay, private benefits and public costs, we know it very well from in this country, particularly from the 1990s. Now, Professor Begg.
Thank you. Since we started on your suite of questions, let me try to answer in a somewhat different way. First, by making the very strong assertion, competitiveness is not a zero-sum game. But in saying that, I think we need to be a bit more precise about the terminology. Competitiveness is a very vague term. It can come about through movements in the real exchange rate, which can be through devaluation, which might well be zero-sum game. If you're competitive devaluations, that's zero-sum. But it can come about through productivity. If everybody raises productivity without altering the net positions, that is a positive sum game. And productivity can come about through innovation. It can come about through better utilization of labor. It can come about through transferring what we sometimes vaguely talk about as the knowledge economy into the way things are done. It can be application of information and communication technologies. All of these things can go in to raise competitiveness, and in that way, it's very much a positive sum game. Now, quite clearly, and yet another concept is not everybody in a closed system can be a net exporter. And so it's a truism to say there can't be 27 Germanys inside the European Union so long as the European Union as a whole has a net balance of zero with the rest of the world. But that doesn't mean that Germany having high exports isn't a good thing. Much of Germany's export success comes about through the rest of the world. It's certainly true that Germany has a big surplus inside the European Union, but there are all kinds of backward and forward linkages. Isn't there a big company in the Czech Republic? What's the one that makes cars? What's that one called?
Skoda. This is what the British loved so much in the 1980s, 1970s.
So companies like Skoda are deeply interconnected with Germany, all sorts of levels. And it's no longer about you're specialized in X and I'm specialized in Y in products. It's functions within these multinational companies. The assembly and manufacturing might take place in the Czech Republic, but some of the design and research is done in Germany. And this is integrated through the various stages of production. So it's a far more complicated question than just saying zero-sum game, everybody like Germany, everybody not like Germany. Now, I don't want to give an economics lecture here, but let me try to come back to Tomáš's question about are there external actors who can help in all of this? Well, one has been engaged, and that is the IMF. The IMF possesses something that didn't exist at the outset of the crisis in Europe, which is experience in crisis management. Just as Professor Milbradt knows many of the people in Berlin, I know many of the people in Brussels, and those that were at the top levels of DG ECFIN of the European Commission had never really been involved in a rescue mission for a country in such difficulty as Greece. And after about 18 months of this, I met one or two of the very senior management of DG ECFIN, and they looked as though they just emerged from a washing machine and been shaken through the spin cycle. They were so jumpy. The IMF is a body which has crisis resolution experience and can be applied in that way. It can also bring some additional financing, although that is delicate politically, because that's saying the IMF, which used to have as its mission dealing with problems in lower income countries, is being asked to sort out a region of the world which really ought to be able to sort out its own problems because it's rich. So that becomes politically delicate. Then, what?
In seniority.
Yeah. And then we can think of other actors like China. China at present has a huge stock of wealth in the form of reserves. It has one real choice for those reserves, which is to put them in US Treasury bonds. So there's been a very strange compact over the last 15 or 20 years where China produces, saves enormously. Consumption in Germany, in China is only about 30 or 40% of GDP, unlike the 60 or 70% you get in Western Europe. And most of those savings have been invested in US Treasury bonds, enabling the US to go on a consumer spending spree. Now, at some point, Europe might start to think of, well, there is all these savings elsewhere in the world, let's try to mobilize some of them for European use. Now, it doesn't solve problems, but it's one way of smoothing the way towards solving problems by having the cash flow. So I think that aspect of international engagement is necessary. And implicit in your question, I think, was your own answer. By failing to deal with its own problems, Europe is clearly losing its normative power in the rest of the world, whether over political or economic areas.
Thank you very much, Professor Begg. Unfortunately, I'm looking to my watch, more or less running out of time. Maybe there is a space for last one short question. Is there any? But short one.
I would like...
Okay, but also short, please.
I would like to make a comment, and that is critical about the German policy. You cannot be a net exporter for all the time, because then you get claims against the rest of the world, and you have to look that the claims come back, or you get real assets. And I think in the long run it's possible. So I think what we are doing now in Germany is we are exporting and giving those part of those importing countries credit, but we don't get the credit back. So what we are really doing is we are producing gifts for others. And that is a very good business model. So Germany has to have a more balanced production production portfolio. We cannot think that all our problems can be solved by exporting to the rest of the world. And the second comment I would like to make, before the euro, 50% of German exports went to the euro area. Now, only 40% go to the euro area. So the integration of Germany into the European market has been reduced. It's quite the contrary to the rest of the Eurozone, especially the southern countries, which have lost exports to the rest of the world, and they are totally dependent on the European market. That is not true for Germany.
Well, I'm not sure whether this is 100% correct, because if you measure the same thing from the side of the importers, so that means countries like Italy, Spain, and so forth, probably the role of Germany as importers to these countries grew over that time. So it rather
not
says,
so much as to the rest of the world.
But it rather says how increased international global competitiveness of Germany while exporting to the rest of the world. Anyway, yeah.
There is one minor point to add to this, which is that what's being described is an income effect. As China grows, it's been investing hugely. So although China's not been consuming, it has been investing. And the principal supplier of its export goods is Germany. So it's an income effect in the rest of the world, which is sucking in imports from Germany, or German exports, as well as the rebalancing of trade because of decisions about the euro area or not the euro area.
That's definitely true, and also as regards the German problem of today, as a huge current account surplus. I mean, there is very important historical experience of Japan in the 60s, 70s, 80s, which had the problem that it had piles of US dollar denominated assets of all kinds, which were not much worth for Germany at that time, for Japan at the time, and finally, you know that the result, Japan today is not the, let's say, most competitive country, even if it's still a very, very competitive corporations, but they are competitive also because of their locations in the rest of the world. So Japan is a troubled economy after so many years of economic miracles. So there are still many, many other, let's say, challenges ahead of all of us, whether we are now in good conditions or in bad conditions. In 10, 20 years, it could be completely different. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's not all today. I have the last task here to ask Mr. Kořán, who is, let's say, host of this conference, for his short final word. Thank you very much for myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank to Professor Milbradt and Professor Begg for an extremely interesting conversation. Thank you very much for that. Just a few concluding words on behalf of the Organizing Institute of International Relations. I would like to say that we were pleasantly shocked by the interest on the part of the participants about the 4th edition of the annual symposium on Czech foreign policy. Some more than 300 experts and professionals were willing to devote their precious time to the discussions, which one of the participants said that maybe there is a growing hunger in the Czech Republic for this kind of discussion, which would be a good thing, or maybe simply our conference service made a great PR job, which would be also a good thing, and maybe both. After the 2 days, I'm not sure that I understand better what was our foreign policy or what it is now or what it will be. Neither am I sure if I know better whether the saving the euro would be a road to perdition or a road to salvation. But what I'm sure is that we can have this kind of discussion in the Czech Republic. We can conduct it in a very professional and matter-of-fact manner, which is not always the case and which is not always natural. Before I will ask you to join us for the last glass of wine, I would like to ask you to join me in thanking all the panelists, our partners, which was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the bank ČSOB, and very importantly our conference service and all the interns, without who this would not be possible. So please join me in thanking them, and thank you all for participation.